The smell of aged paper and dry rot hung heavy in the air, a scent I'd grown to associate with the hunt. My name is Elias Thorne, and I specialize in the acquisition of lost knowledge. Not just rare books, but the kind of texts deemed too disturbing, too esoteric, or occasionally, too true, to ever see the light of day. I was an archivist of the forbidden. My current obsession was a manuscript known only as the Chronicle of the Void Watchers. Legend claimed it was penned by an 18th-century recluse named Elias Finch, a cartographer who, late in life, claimed to have mapped not the Earth, but the psychic distortions of a non-Euclidean reality bleeding into our own. Standard historical consensus filed Finch under eccentric, but my sources hinted at something far darker. The trail led me to Blackwood Manor, a dilapidated Georgian mansion tucked away in the foggy, forgotten corners of coastal Maine. It had belonged to the Finch family for generations, and the last known relative, a distant cousin who dealt in antiques, had recently passed, leaving the estate, and its contents, to the bank. I secured a 3-day private viewing appointment, a hefty deposit ensuring no one else would interfere. The bank's representative, a nervous young man named Peter who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, handed me a heavy brass key. "The main library is on the 2nd floor, sir," Peter muttered, his eyes darting toward the encroaching shadows of the late afternoon. "The power's out, been that way for months. Use the lantern, and, please be careful. This place, it settles a lot." I ignored him, my heart already hammering a rhythm against my ribs, the thrill of the chase. The interior of the mansion was a labyrinth of dust sheets and decaying opulence. The air inside was colder than the air outside. The library was the heart of the home, a vast room with soaring ceilings and 2 tiers of shelving. Millions of pages waited there, suffocating under a century of stillness. I lit the antique oil lantern Peter had provided. The flame threw flickering, elongated shadows, making the towering shelves seem like skeletal sentinels. I spent the first hour meticulously cataloging the obvious, theological texts, early American history, poetry collections. Nothing Finch. I moved to the locked section, a series of iron-barred cabinets tucked behind a massive globe. I forced the rusted latch with a specialized tool and began to inspect the contents. There, nestled amongst treatises on forgotten astronomy, I found it, a slim, unmarked folio bound in sun-bleached human skin, vellum, the bank would call it, but the faint patterning of pores was unmistakable. My breath hitched. This wasn't the Chronicle of the Void Watchers, but a supporting text, Finch's personal ledger of materials. I flipped it open. The handwriting was neat, obsessive. It detailed his sources, his purchases, and cryptically, his failures. One entry, dated 12th July 1788, was circled repeatedly, almost violently. "The binding is complete. The words are woven into the flesh. The map is rendered. But where is the archive? The great, echoing archive that holds the memory of all we are not? It is not here. It is in between. My lantern light wavered. The entry meant nothing, yet it felt like a cold whisper down my spine. I was looking for a book. Finch was looking for an archive, a collection, a repository. I scanned the shelf again. The space where a manuscript of significant size should have been was empty. Not just empty, but noticeably cleaner than the surrounding shelf. A book had been removed recently. This was the hook. If the manuscript was missing, the bank would simply claim it was never there. But the Chronicle was the reason I was here. I checked the rear of the shelf, brushing aside a curtain of cobwebs. My fingers brushed against something metallic. I pulled it out, a simple silver pocket watch. Not an expensive piece, but it was running. The ticking, loud in the absolute silence of the room, marked the time as exactly 3:17 a.m. But it was only 7:30 p.m. I opened the watch. The inner casing, instead of an inscription, was filled with a meticulously drawn, tiny diagram, a circle, bisected by a jagged, uneven line, with 3 perfect, concentric spirals emerging from the line's center. Below the diagram, etched so finely it was almost invisible, was a single word, echo. Suddenly, the floorboards above the ceiling, the attic, which Peter had claimed was sealed, let out a deafening, single creak. It was the sound of a heavy, deliberate step. I held my breath, extinguishing the lantern immediately. The silence that followed was not empty. It was pressurized, listening. Then, a voice, a dry, raspy whisper that seemed to emanate not from the attic, but from the very walls of the library itself, echoed clearly in the dark. He took the map, Elias. You shouldn't have opened the ledger. I was completely alone in a sealed, dark mansion. No one knew I was here except Peter, who was miles away. Someone, or something, was waiting. And it knew my name. The name. That was what truly paralyzed me. Not the voice, which was gravel and ancient regret, but the fact that it had spoken my name, Elias. I stood frozen in the absolute blackness, the cold silver of the pocket watch still clutched in my hand. My mind, usually a fortress of cold logic, scrambled for an explanation. Peter, the bank representative, must have come back. He must have recognized me or my reputation and was playing some elaborate, cruel trick. But the voice wasn't Peter's. It was too hollow, too resonant, like sound vibrating off stone that had been screaming for centuries. And Peter had been terrified of this place. I slowly brought the lantern back up, shielding the light with my body, the flame struggling against the sudden, suffocating chill. The library was exactly as it had been, rows of mute, dusty books. The iron cabinets were still open, revealing Finch's esoteric collection. I looked up, scanning the dark ceiling beams. The attic. I had to know. The possibility of the manuscript, the Chronicle of the Void Watchers, being hidden up there, or more disturbingly, the person who had spoken my name still being up there, was an unbearable weight. I pocketed the strange pocket watch and the skin-bound ledger. I grabbed the lantern and quietly exited the library, the floorboards groaning a protest that felt deafening in the silence. The attic staircase was concealed behind a tapestry depicting a strangely blank, unsettling landscape. I pulled the heavy fabric aside. The stairs were steep, wooden, and looked dangerously fragile. Every step I took was a negotiation with the old wood. Creak. Pause. Creak. Pause. The light from the lantern swung wildly, illuminating dust motes dancing in the cold air. As I ascended, I noticed something strange about the walls. They were not plaster or wood paneling, but rough, dark stones, sealed with a mortar that looked almost like dried blood. It was a construction style completely different from the rest of the Georgian mansion. It felt like the attic had been built around some ancient, pre-existing structure. I reached the top. The attic was enormous, a wide, open expanse choked with heavy silence. It wasn't filled with the usual junk of an old house. There were no trunks, no broken furniture, just a vast, empty floor and exposed rafters, leading to a single point of interest at the far end, a high, narrow, windowless room, sealed by a solid oak door with a heavy, circular lock. This lock wasn't rusted, it looked almost new, polished steel. I approached the door, holding the lantern up. On the wood of the door, someone had used a thick, tar-like substance to paint the exact, jagged, bisected circle I had seen inside the pocket watch. The 3 perfect spirals were there, too. The voice had said. He took the map. And the watch, currently reading 3:17 a.m. in my pocket, had the word echo and the map-like diagram. I pressed my ear to the cold oak. I heard nothing. I dug out a small, specialized toolkit, my master key set, and began to work on the complex circular lock. It took 10 minutes of painstaking, silent effort, but finally, with a soft, clean click, the tumbler turned. I pushed the door open. The room inside was small, perhaps 10 by 10 feet, and completely empty save for one object, a low, slate table in the center, perfectly clean, as if wiped down moments before. But it was the air in the room that made me recall. It wasn't just cold, it was dead. It was the absence of temperature, the cessation of sound, the feeling of absolute vacuum pressing against my eardrums. On the slate table lay a single object. It was not a book, nor a map, but a complex, 3-dimensional geometric shape carved from a single piece of dark, polished quartz. It was impossible to mentally resolve. Its angels shifted as I circled the table, suggesting contradictory perspectives simultaneously. It looked like a solid representation of that spiral diagram in the watch, but alive, pulsing with an inner darkness. And pinned to the center of this quartz shape, by a rusted sewing needle, was a small, torn strip of heavy vellum, a scrap of paper from Finch's missing manuscript. On the vellum, written in Finch's cramped hand, were 2 lines. The archive is the interval. Never trust the 3:17 echo. I took a deep, shaky breath, reaching for the scrap. As my fingers closed around the vellum, the metallic smell of the room intensified. Then, from the absolute silence, the sound of the pocket watch in my own pocket began to chime. Not a pleasant Westminster chime, but a rapid, frantic, dissonant clanging. And the time displayed on its face, visible through my trousers, 3:17 a.m. I looked up. The single light source, my oil lantern, was directly overhead. Its flame was suddenly snuffed out. Not blown out, but simply gone. I was plunged into a blackness so profound it felt viscous, suffocating. The air in the room, the dead air, began to feel like pressure, squeezing me from all sides. Then, the terrible, gravelly voice was back, no longer a whisper from the walls, but right behind me, an inch from my ear. It's not just an interval, Elias. It's an opening. I spun around in the black, dropping the quartz shape. It hit the slate table, and the resulting sound was not a thud, but a sickening, wet slurp. A pair of hands, icy cold, with fingers impossibly long and thin, reached out and clamped onto my shoulders. They began to pull. Not backward, but down. I felt my entire body being forced to buckle, to bend at an angle no human body should tolerate. I screamed, but the sound was devoured by the dead air. I was being folded, squeezed, into the impossible geometry of the dark. The grip on my shoulders was beyond human strength, driving the air from my lungs in a silent, suffocated gasp. I was being pulled into the floor, into the solid slate table, into something that defied the laws of mass and space. The fingers felt like polished bone, or maybe the same cold quartz as the fallen object, and the pressure was focused precisely on the joints of my shoulders, forcing my spine into a catastrophic curve. My survival instinct, honed over years of dealing with dangerous artifacts and unscrupulous collectors, finally overrode the terror. I had one hand free. I remembered the oil lantern. It lay nearby, extinguished but still heavy. I swung my arm wildly in the absolute, viscous blackness, the movement awkward due to the strange downward force. My knuckles connected with the heavy metal base. I didn't try to relight it. Instead, I drove the jagged edge of the lantern base backward, aiming blindly toward the source of the pressure, the unseen entity behind me. There was a sound that was not a cry, but a sharp, wet hiss, like cold water hitting molten metal. The grip instantly vanished, and I stumbled forward, crashing to my knees on the cold slate floor. The blackness was still total, but the crushing, vacuum-like pressure lifted. I scrambled away from the table, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. I had to get out of that little, dead room. I felt for the doorframe and yanked the heavy oak door shut. The circular lock clicked, almost reluctantly, back into place. I leaned against the door, sweat turning icy on my forehead, trying to catch my breath. The silence was back, but it was now a silence heavy with malice, the silence of a predator waiting for its prey to make the next move. My lantern was gone, lost somewhere in the black void of the small room. I was trapped in the larger attic, holding only the skin-bound ledger and the silently ticking pocket watch. I needed light. I dug out my phone. The screen flashed to life, a small, weak, but glorious beacon against the oppressive darkness. I activated the flashlight, sweeping the beam around the massive, empty attic space. It was exactly as I had seen it before, bare rafters, wide wooden floor, and the sealed door of the inner room now facing me. But something had changed. I slowly lowered the beam to the floor directly in front of the sealed room. Where the oak floorboards should have met the wall, there was now a line of fine, grey powder. It looked like ash, but it smelled of ozone and something sharply metallic, like fresh blood mixing with old pennies. I followed the line of powder with my light. It led from the base of the sealed room, across the main floor, and directly to the top of the wooden staircase. It was a trail. But not a footprint trail. It was a trail of residue, left by something that had scraped or dissolved itself across the floor. Then, the phone screen flickered violently, cycling through colors, green, purple, blinding white, and then went dead. The battery was fully charged. I had checked it before entering the manor. Panic tightened its chokehold. It's trying to isolate me. I was back in the dark, but my eyes had begun to adjust slightly to the negligible ambient light filtering from below. I could just make out the dark silhouette of the sealed door. I thought about the pocket watch, the thing that had warned me, the thing that had screamed at the moment of attack. I pulled it out. The tiny tick-tock was loud, unnervingly normal. I held the watch up to my face, using the pale, luminous hands. It still read 3:17 a.m. I flipped it open, looking at the tiny, etched diagram, the bisected circle, the 3 spirals. The diagram seemed to pulse slightly in the dim light. The archive is the interval. Never trust the 3:17 echo. I realized what the time meant. It wasn't the time of day. It was a frequency. A specific point of dimensional fragility. Finch hadn't mapped the Earth. He had mapped the bleed between realities, and 3:17 a.m. was the time that window opened. And the voice had told me, it's not just an interval, Elias. It's an opening. If I trusted the watch, I had to conclude that I was currently experiencing this opening. If the attic was the archive, a repository of forbidden knowledge, then the entity was a gatekeeper. I looked back at the sealed door. The creature was trapped in there, perhaps, or merely waiting. I had to leave. Now. I moved silently to the top of the stairs, feeling the cold, rough stone of the attic walls again. I put my foot down, gingerly, testing the first wooden step. But the step wasn't wood anymore. My foot met nothing. I dropped the remaining distance, hitting the floor of the landing below with a jarring thud. I rolled onto my back, sending a shower of dust and debris flying. I shone the faint, fading glow of the pocket watch toward the attic entrance. The staircase was gone. Not destroyed, not collapsed. The entire heavy wooden structure, the stairs, the risers, the newel posts, had been neatly, surgically removed. The opening now looked like a clean, dark marv leading down, maybe 30 feet, to the second floor landing. It was a drop I would not survive. I slowly stood, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The creature hadn't chased me. It had edited the architecture around me. I was sealed in the attic of Blackwood Manor, trapped at the precise moment of 3:17 a.m., with a geometrically impossible entity that knew my name. And then, from the blackness near where the stairs used to be, I heard a sound that chilled me to the soul, the unmistakable, rhythmic tick-tick-tick of another pocket watch. And this one was getting closer. The echo had found its second frequency. The sound of the second clock was horrifyingly intimate. It wasn't the faint, clean tick of the watch in my pocket. This was a heavier, mechanical clack-clack-clack, punctuated by the grinding of tiny gears under immense strain. It sounded like a small, intricate machine walking on the wooden floor. I retreated, stumbling back toward the sealed inner room. The entity I had encountered felt like a prisoner, bound to the ritual of the 3:17 echo. But this new sound, this mechanical presence, felt like the hunter. I pressed myself against the oak door of the sealed room, its surface still radiating that deep, dead cold. My brain was a blur of information: Finch, the cartographer, the Void Watchers, the missing manuscript, the Chronicle, the archive as an interval. And the diagram, the bisected circle and the 3 spirals. I had to understand what Finch meant by the archive. It wasn't a library, it was a phenomenon. And the manuscript must contain the key to surviving the interval. I pulled out the skin-bound ledger. The faint light from the luminous watch hands wasn't enough to read the precise script, but I ran my fingers over the raised, obsessive text from the second part of the book, the section marked failures and corrections. The heavy, mechanical ticking was getting closer, moving from the edge of the large attic room toward the center. My fingers traced a line I hadn't noticed before, etched deeply into the dried vellum near the center fold. They seek to correct the map. They are not satisfied with the interval. I hid the key not in the book, but in the binding itself. The binding is the lock. The binding. The skin. I immediately brought the ledger up to my nose. Under the smell of age and decay, there was a faint, sharp scent, not human, but something acrid, almost metallic. I felt along the spine of the thin book. Near the top, where the skin folded over the thick backing board, my fingers found a faint seam. I slid a thumbnail under it and gently pulled. The outer layer of dried, human vellum peeled away, revealing a second, inner layer of material. It wasn't paper or cloth. It was a single, thin sheet of tarnished copper, meticulously hammered flat and sewn in place with hair-thin wire. And etched into the copper, using the same precise, obsessive hand as the writing inside, was the missing manuscript. Not words, but diagrams. A massive, intricate celestial map unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't constellations or planets. It was a map of intersecting wavelengths, psychic distortions, and geometric nodes. The center of the copper map was marked with the familiar bisected circle and 3 spirals. But extending from the spirals were lines that looked like musical staffs, covered in symbols that could be musical notes, mathematical equations, or some alien script. The mechanical clacking stopped. It was right behind me, silent, waiting. I froze, the copper sheet reflecting the faint watchlight in my trembling hand. Then, a new sound. A sound of slow, heavy breathing. It was a wet, laborious sound, like air moving through a throat made of gravel and wet paper. I heard the dry, rasping voice, this time much lower, closer, and somehow multitonal, like 3 voices whispering at once in different keys. The cartographer tried to bind the echo. He tried to map the shadow. I spun around, holding the copper sheet up like a shield. Standing barely 6 feet away, illuminated in the weak glow of the watch, was the creature. It was tall, obscenely thin, and shrouded in what looked like heavy, black funeral linens, caked in the same grey, metallic ash I had seen on the floor. It had no face, only a smooth, featureless surface where the head should be, covered by the hood of the dark cloth. But what held my attention were its hands. They were not quartz or bone, but articulated extensions of clockwork. Long, spindly brass fingers, ending in needle-sharp points, with visible cogs and springs churning silently beneath the black cloth of its sleeves. And in the center of its chest, visible through a torn section of the cloth, was an enormous, antique grandfather clock mechanism. It was this device that was making the dreadful, heavy ticking. "The map is incomplete," the creature rasped, its voice dragging along the floor. He left out the cost. Its clockwork hand slowly raised, pointing a sharp, brass finger at the copper map in my hand. That map shows the where. I am the when. The 317 echo is satisfied with payment. I took a desperate step back, hitting the solid oak door. What do you want? The missing page, the creature hissed, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. The page that shows how to close the interval. The one you are now standing on. I looked down. The oak door. It wasn't just a door, it was the last page. The last secret. The creature's mechanism word, and its thin, metallic fingers began to unfurl, reaching for the copper map, the key to the archive. I had seconds. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. I had to create a distraction. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I brought my wrist up, slamming the small, luminous pocket watch against the massive central gear of the clockwork creature's chest. A high-pitched, agonizing metallic shriek tore through the attic. Sparks erupted where the two clocks collided. The creature stumbled back, clutching its chest, its voice distorting into a garbled static. The small watch was gone, shattered, absorbed into the enemy's mechanism. But the creature was reeling, giving me a moment of blessed confusion. The attack on its heart had worked. I seized the opportunity. I turned, placing the flat copper map against the oak door where the strange symbol was painted. It fit perfectly, like a key into an impossibly large lock. And as the copper touched the wood, the entire attic, the floor, the walls, the air itself, began to vibrate with a low, overwhelming hum. The oak door, the last page, began to glow with a sickly, internal green light. I heard the creature behind me recover, its gears grinding, its voice a deafening roar. No. You will not bind the echo. I yanked the copper map away. The glow on the door intensified, burning the bisected circle symbol into my retinas. I turned and fled into the darkness of the enormous attic, the creature's mechanical footsteps and its terrifying, multi-toned scream echoing behind me. I wasn't running from a ghost. I was running from a broken clock that hunted at the wrong time. And I was now holding the map that could either close the interval or tear it wide open. I didn't stop running until I hit the far wall of the attic, stumbling behind a massive, defunct stone chimney column. The hum that had started when I pressed the copper map to the door was now a physical force, vibrating in my bones, blurring my vision. The clockwork man's pursuit was deliberate, not frantic. I could hear the clack-clack-clack of its brass feet pause and restart, calculating the most efficient path through the darkness. It was hunting not with eyes, but with rhythm. I flattened myself against the cold stone, holding the copper map tightly. My chest ached from the run, and the metallic ozone smell of the creature's ash was heavy in the air. I need light. The copper map was useless as a shield, but vital as information. I risked pulling out a small, waterproof emergency match I always carry. It flared, the sudden light throwing sharp, dancing shadows across the cavernous attic. I immediately focused the light on the copper map, forcing myself to ignore the clockwork man's advance. The map wasn't just celestial, it was architectural. The lines that extended from the central spiral, the supposed musical staffs, were actually depicting the structure of Blackwood Manor. One section, labeled Conjunction Point Gamma, showed the library and the globe. Another, anchor beta, pointed directly to the chimney I was hiding behind. The map was a blueprint of dimensional instability, revealing where the rules of our reality had been bent or broken to allow the archive to exist. The entire house was a key, and Finch, the cartographer, was also the architect. I traced the line of the chimney, anchor beta. The symbols running along the line were not notes, but instructions, a series of precise measurements and geometric phrases. One phrase stood out, etched in a larger, more confident script. To break the interval, you must invert the anchor. The anchor hears the echo. The anchor hears the echo, I whispered, glancing around the massive stone structure. Just then, the clockwork footsteps paused. The creature knew where I was. You seek the inversion, the multitoned voice hissed from 20 feet away, the sound echoing unnervingly off the empty walls. Finch sought to lock me out. He merely locked us in. A brass hand shot out from the darkness and slammed against the stone wall beside me, the sound a horrific crack. It wasn't trying to grab me yet. It was marking its territory, forcing me to move. I extinguished the match instantly, plunging us back into the oppressive blackness, but not before I saw it. Near the base of the chimney, set into the floorboards, was a small, ornate metal grate. It was flush with the floor, almost invisible. The grate was the anchor. I dropped to the floor, feeling for the cold metal. My fingers closed around a small, recessed handle. You try to play the architect with a stolen map, Elias, the creature taunted, its voice now closer, less than 10 feet away. But the foundation is unstable. You will cause a collapse. I ignored the threat, focusing all my energy on the small handle. I yanked. The grate lifted with a terrible, rasping sound of ancient metal scraping against stone. A rush of air, not cold, but warm and utterly stagnant, poured out of the opening, carrying with it a distinct, overwhelming smell of gunpowder and formaldehyde. I peered down. The opening was a small, tight vertical shaft, leading into total blackness. It was too small for me to climb down. But the copper map had indicated the inversion of the anchor. I quickly tore a piece of thick paper from the skin ledger, rolled it tight, and lit it with the last remaining match in the box. I dropped the makeshift torch into the shaft. It fell for several feet, illuminating the interior of the chimney shaft. It was completely lined with heavy canvas bags. I recognized the shape and the dusty texture, old-fashioned sandbags, packed tight. They weren't for structural support. They were soundproofing. The paper torch landed on a lower level, revealing what was beneath the bags, a small, dark room, crammed with hundreds of identical, empty hourglasses. They stood on shelves and tables, filled with fine, white sand, all perfectly upright, none of them running. This was Finch's true workshop. His laboratory for observing the interval. The Clockwork Man was right behind me. I heard the sharp, brass clink of its foot lifting, preparing to step. With a desperate cry, I brought the heavy, skin-bound ledger up and slammed it down with all my force directly into the open grate. The parchment and the heavy cover boards wedged themselves into the opening, bridging the gap between the attic floor and the chimney shaft. The creature hesitated, its grinding mechanism momentarily silent. Then, from the depths of the chimney shaft, a sudden, high-pitched whining began. It wasn't the creature, but the hourglasses in the hidden room below. The pressure from the ledger slamming the grate must have shifted one of the sandbags, causing a cascade. I heard the distinct shatter of glass, followed by the dry, rushing sound of sand pouring out. The Clockwork Man bellowed, a sound like 1,000 gears stripping simultaneously. You released the grit. You cannot stop the interval once the grit is free. The whining intensified, rapidly accelerating into a scream. The hourglasses below had started running. All of them, instantly. The white sand, the grit, was now flowing, marking time within the anchor. The entire attic structure around us groaned in protest. The walls began to crack, the fissures appearing instantly, spider-webbing out from the stone chimney. I had inverted the anchor, and the house was responding. The archive was collapsing. I scrambled away from the shuddering chimney, clutching the copper map. The Clockwork Man was thrashing violently, its arms swinging wildly, hitting the cracking rafters. The collapse is the closing, the creature shrieked, its voice now desperate, laced with fear. But you will be flattened into the past. I raced toward the gaping hole where the staircase used to be. The collapse was the only way out. I just had to get to the point of dimensional failure before the house imploded. I looked down at the dark, 30-foot drop. The wooden floor of the second story was visible, but unreachable. Then, I looked at the copper map again. The map wasn't just a blueprint of the interval. It was a guide to the breaches. I scanned the wall near the missing staircase, the wall of rough, dark stones that seemed older than the house itself. The map showed a line, labeled Exit Null, running through that exact spot. I pressed the copper map against the ancient stone. The metal was instantly chilled, and the geometric spirals on the map began to glow an icy blue. The rough stone wall dissolved before my eyes, not crumbling, but unmaking itself, dissolving into a shimmering curtain of black, watery light. A dimensional breach. An exit. I took a running leap, plunging into the black, watery light, leaving the shrieking Clockwork Man to be consumed by the final collapse of the archive. I tumbled through the void, holding the map, hoping that Finch's design would lead me to the present, and not to the terrifying, unbound reality of the Void Watchers. The black, watery light was not air, it was a viscous, cold medium that swallowed all sound and sensation. I wasn't falling down. I felt like I was being pulled sideways and backward simultaneously, stretched thin across time and space. The copper map remained clutched in my hand, its icy blue glow the only constant in the disorienting void. The screaming of the Clockwork Man was instantly muted, replaced by a low, powerful resonance, the sound of an impossibly large bell vibrating in a vacuum. This was the echo itself. My eyes, however, adjusted to the unnatural light. The void was filled with faint, shimmering lines, the same intersecting wavelengths depicted on the copper map. I was literally tumbling through Finch's cartography. The tumbling sensation abruptly ceased. I slammed into something hard and dusty. I lay motionless for a moment, gasping, trying to orient myself. The air was breathable again, thick with dust and the familiar smell of dry rot. I opened my eyes. The blue glow from the map faded. I was on the second-floor landing of Blackwood Manor. I was back in the house, but I was disoriented. I was lying on the floor, covered in dust and grit. I must have emerged from the wall where the staircase used to be. I pushed myself up, my body protesting the rough landing. My initial check, the copper map was safe, still in my hand. The skin-bound ledger was gone, having served its purpose jamming the chimney grate. The strange pocket watch was lost, destroyed in the Clockwork Man's mechanism. I was alive. But how much time had passed? I listened for the sound of the Clockwork Man or the collapsing attic. Silence. The crushing hum was gone. The house felt inert, peaceful, but deeply wrong. I swept my hand across the wall where I emerged. It was solid wood paneling, seamless. The black, watery exit I had created was completely sealed, as if it had never been there. The architectural wound had closed. The interval was over. The 317 echo had ceased. I had to get out. The mansion felt unstable, like a wound that had just been stitched closed and could tear open again at any moment. I rushed toward the main staircase leading to the ground floor. As I moved, I noticed the dust patterns on the floor. My own footprints, from earlier, were clearly visible, leading from the stairs toward the library. But running over those prints was a different set of prints. They were long, thin, and disturbingly shallow, like a bare foot gliding across the floor. They started at the open door of the library and led, with an unnerving, deliberate pace, toward the stairs. I followed the trail of strange footprints, heart tightening. I reached the grand staircase. The prints led down. I peered over the railing. The prints continued across the marbled foyer floor, leading directly to the massive front door of the mansion. The door, which I had locked behind me upon arrival, was now slightly ajar. A sliver of cold, misty night air was creeping in. Someone had been here. Someone, or something, had entered the house, accessed the library while I was in the attic, and had just left. The Clockwork Man had said, "He took the map, Elias. You shouldn't have opened the ledger." The Clockwork Man was referring to the original manuscript, the Chronicle of the Void Watchers. I had forced the closure of the archive before I could find it. I rushed down the stairs, adrenaline overriding caution. I reached the foyer and pushed the front door open. The coastal fog outside was thick, silent, and luminous under the high moon. The air was heavy with salt and pine. I could see the recent disturbance in the gravel path leading from the door, a single, thin set of shoe prints, leading away into the fog. They were too normal to be the barefoot prints I saw inside, but they were fresh. I ran a few steps out into the fog, then stopped, peering left and right. Nothing. The person who had the original manuscript was gone. I felt a wave of crushing disappointment. I had risked everything and lost the prize. I turned back to the house, reaching for the solid oak door to lock it, when I noticed something I had missed in my panic to escape. Etched into the polished brass of the massive door knocker was a small, crudely drawn symbol. The same bisected circle and 3 spirals. The diagram of the interval. And then I saw the note. It was pinned to the door with a long, rusty nail, directly over the diagram. It was a thick, old piece of paper, folded twice, sealed with a blob of black wax. I tore it off, ripping the paper around the nail. The wax seal bore the imprint of a single, deeply detailed eye, the symbol of a void watcher. I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat, elegant, and entirely unfamiliar. It wasn't Finch's. The note was short. Dear Mr. Thorne, I regret we missed one another. You proved the house was the key, but the archive is larger than the manor. The Chronicle is safe. We needed the echo to verify the coordinates. Thank you for opening the interval for us. We will meet again where the map concludes. Always observing, AF, Archivist's Associate. A cold spike of dread pierced my chest. AF Alistair Finch. No, the note specified associate. And they had waited for me to open the dimensional window. I hadn't escaped the Clockwork man's trap. I had been used as the tool to activate the trap for someone else. The sound of an engine broke the silence. A car, headlights dim in the fog, pulled slowly up the driveway toward the mansion. It was Peter, the nervous bank representative. He was a day early for our agreed-upon rendezvous. I quickly crumpled the note and stuffed it into my pocket. Peter stepped out of the car, his face pale with worry. He saw me, standing alone on the gravel path. Mr. Thorne, what are you doing out here? I got a call this morning, a preliminary structural report. They said the house, it's completely sound. But I swore I heard a siren go off here last night. A siren. Not the collapsing house. The echo. I took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in my voice. The house is fine, Peter. Just old. But the manuscript. The Chronicle, it's gone. Stolen. Peter looked relieved, then confused. Gone? But who would know it was here? I stared past him into the deepening fog. I looked down at the copper map still in my hand. It was the only tangible link I had to the truth. Someone who knows how to read the archive, I said, my voice low and determined. And I believe they just left me the next coordinate. I had to find AF. I had to find the Chronicle. And I had to understand what the Void Watchers were truly mapping. I need to leave, Peter. Now, I said, walking past him to his car. I need the fastest route to the nearest major university with an extensive 18th century cartography collection. The game had changed. I was no longer the hunter. I was the one who had been lead. And the map had just told me where to go next. Peter, bewildered but clearly eager to leave the airy grounds of Blackwood Manor, drove me to the nearest major city with an airport. Within hours, I was airborne, charting a course toward my next destination, the Harrington University Library in Boston. Harrington boasts one of the world's most comprehensive, yet underutilized, collections of 18th century cartography and astronomical records, precisely the kind of knowledge base Alistair Finch would have been drawing from. My flight was a blur of caffeine and frantic analysis. I spread the copper map, Finch's true manuscript, across the tray table. Its surface was still faintly cold, radiating a subtle, metallic smell. The message from AF, Archivist's Associate, had been clear. We will meet again where the map concludes. I traced the intersecting lines on the copper. The map wasn't just a blueprint of Blackwood Manor, It was a schematic for several different anchor points across the New England area. The three spirals, the central motif, all converged on a single, final node labeled simply Omega. The symbol for Omega was not a letter, but the same detailed I that had been stamped into the black wax seal on the note. I compared the diagram of the Omega point to the surrounding geographic markings, triangulating the coordinates. The Omega point corresponded, with disturbing precision, to the location of the Harrington University Library. Specifically, to the library's vast, sub-level archives, the Finch Rare Collection. A.F. was waiting for me there. They hadn't stolen the Chronicle to hide it. They had taken it to the next designated meeting point on Finch's map. The question was why? Why leave me the copper key, and why lead me directly to the location of the final, complete manuscript? The answer lay in the Clockwork man's last, desperate warning. The map shows the where. I am the when. You will be flattened into the past. AF needed me to decipher the when, the precise temporal coordinate needed to unlock the Omega point. I arrived at Harrington, a Gothic masterpiece of architecture that looked more like a castle than a university. I wasted no time. Flashing my forged credentials as a visiting archival analyst, I gained access to the restricted sub-level vaults. The air down here was sterile, dehumidified, and cold, the exact opposite of the decaying warmth of Blackwood Manor. The Finch Rare Collection was housed in a climate-controlled room within the vaults, behind a reinforced steel door. Inside, I found not an antique archive, but a modern research facility, complete with digital scanners and UV lighting. And in the center of the room, on a specially mounted, velvet-lined pedestal, was the Chronicle of the Void Watchers. It was a large, heavy book bound in dark leather, studded with brass rivets, exactly the size a centuries-old manuscript should be. I approached it slowly, feeling the triumphant rush of a hunter finally cornering its prey, mixed with a deep, consuming dread. Sitting nearby, meticulously reviewing a set of fragile astronomical charts, was a person. They were young, perhaps late 20s, impeccably dressed in a sharp black suit. They had close-cropped silver hair and wore thick, circular spectacles that reflected the UV light, completely obscuring their eyes. On the mahogany desk next to them was a small, antique device, a miniature metronome, its pendulum swinging in a smooth, silent rhythm. They looked up, a slight, almost imperceptible smile touching their lips. Mr. Thorne. Punctual, as the map predicted. Their voice was calm, precise, and genderless, carrying a slight, formal European accent. AF, I stated, stepping further into the room. The archivist's associate. You took the manuscript and led me here. I am Dr. Alex Finch, they corrected, rising fluidly. A distant, and somewhat dedicated, descendant of Alistair. And yes, I led you here. You had the key, the copper map. I merely provided the lock, the book. And the Clockwork man? The thing in the attic? Alex's smile vanished. A necessary component of the anchor. Finch called it the Chronometer spirit. It enforces the 317 echo. It tries to hold the interval open, to pull any available matter back into the past it protects. You were an effective distraction. My blood ran cold. You used me to bind a dimensional entity and collapse the archive. I used you to complete the map, Alex countered, moving around the desk toward the pedestal. The copper map is incomplete, Mr. Thorne. It shows the where of the archive. We still need the final when. Alex tapped the front cover of the dark leather book. Alistair knew the Chronometer spirit would hunt anyone who tried to access the Chronicle directly. So he didn't write the final page. He encoded it. He hid the key to the final when on the copper map, and the final lock on the book. Alex reached into their pocket and produced a single, polished piece of the same dark quartz I had found in the attic, a perfectly formed, six-sided polygon. The quartz, the grit, is the physical material of the interval, Alex explained. The Chronometer spirit shrieked when you freed the grit, because the grit is time itself. It is the raw material needed to write the final temporal coordinate. Alex placed the quartz polygon onto the cover of the Chronicle. It sat flat against the leather, seemingly inert. Now, the final gambit, Alex said, looking directly at me. Their thick glasses reflected the UV light, making their eyes shine with an unnatural, intense violet. The copper map in your hand is the negative. The book is the positive. When they touch, the interval will open here, at the omega point. Alex produced a small, silver flask filled with a clear, volatile liquid. We have the where. We have the what, the grit. But we need the when to prevent the Chronometer spirit from following us and pulling us back into the collapsing past. And what is the when? I asked, gripping the copper map tighter, my heart pounding a final, desperate rhythm. The 317 echo is merely the frequency, Alex stated, pouring the volatile liquid onto the leather binding of the book. The true when is the moment the archivist completes the map. The liquid hit the leather and began to steam, releasing an acrid, metallic smoke that stung my lungs. We need the copper map, Elias. You are holding the key to the final archive. And I am quite done waiting. Alex reached out a hand, their expression now deadly serious. Give me the map. Or watch as I ignite the leather, burning the final coordinate before either of us can access it. I hesitated. I had to assume the volatility of the liquid was a bluff, but the smoke was real. Why the elaborate plan? I demanded. You could have just taken the map from the start. Because the map is only activated by the intent of the cartographer, Mr. Thorne, Alex whispered, leaning close, their violet eyes burning through the smoke. And Alistair's intent was not to open the archive, but to seal it. We need you, the person who successfully collapsed one anchor, to willfully open the next. You must want the knowledge in the Chronicle more than you fear the consequences. I looked at the book, then at the frantic, determined eyes behind the thick lenses. The only way to stop Alex, the only way to get the Chronicle and finish Finch's work, was to play the final hand. I took a deep breath, and with a decisive motion, I brought the cold copper map down, slamming it against the steaming, chemically treated leather cover of the Chronicle of the Void Watchers. The moment the copper touched the book, the entire sublevel vault went silent. The lights died. The air became thick and heavy. Then, a low, guttural, rhythmic hum began, louder and deeper than anything I had heard in Blackwood Manor. The quartz polygon on the book's cover began to spin rapidly, its surface shimmering with impossible, fractal geometries. A voice, not the Clockwork man's, but 1,000 voices speaking in unison, ancient and terrible, boomed from the walls of the Harrington archive. The archive is open. The Void Watchers are here. And in the pitch blackness of the vault, I heard a sound that turned my blood to ice, the rhythmic, smooth, silent swing of the metronome that Alex had left on the desk. The wen had been set. And we were now in the interval, trapped in the final anchor point. The deep, booming chorus of 1,000 voices proclaiming, "The Void Watchers are here," tore through the sublevel vault. The air felt thick, vibrating with the sound of pure, concentrated data that was too vast for the human mind to process. I immediately yanked my hand back from the copper map and the Chronicle. The book and the map remained pressed together on the pedestal, glowing with a terrible, pulsing violet light. The quartz polygon on the cover was spinning so fast it was a blur. In the total darkness of the vault, I could barely make out the silhouette of Alex Finch. They didn't appear afraid. Instead, their stance radiated a tense, expectant triumph. "It worked," Alex whispered, their voice strained with awe. "The Omega Point is open. We have accessed the true, unedited archive." "What did you do?" I shouted over the booming resonance. "What are the Void Watchers?" "They are the original cartographers, Mr. Thorne. They map the gaps in the universe, the spaces between realities," Alex explained, sounding almost ecstatic. "Alistair Finch trapped them out. I am bringing them home. But the data is overwhelming the local interface." Alex pointed toward the large steel door of the vault. A viscous, black fluid was seeping through the edges, boiling and bubbling as it touched the sterile floor. The smell was sharp, like burning metal and ozone. "That's the raw data feed, the void ink," Alex said, their voice suddenly frantic. "The archive is rewriting the local reality. We have minutes before this room becomes the archive's core." I took a desperate step back, reaching for the heavy wooden chair near the desk. The metronome was still swinging silently, its rhythm the only source of sanity in the chaos. The metronome, I realized. That sets the when. Stop it. No. That sets the duration. Alex snapped. It holds the interval open just long enough for us to retrieve the one thing that will grant us true sight. The final map. Alex gestured toward the pulsing book. The Chronicle contains the location of the true archive, the one not bound by the Chronometer spirit. But we need to decode the final lock. I used the chair to shield myself, backing toward the far wall. Alistair didn't want the archive opened, Alex. He wanted to seal it. He was weak. He was afraid of the knowledge. Alex scoffed, ignoring me as they approached the pedestal, reaching for the glowing book. I saw my opportunity. I didn't attack Alex. I attacked the metronome. I hurled the wooden chair across the room with all my strength. It didn't hit the metronome directly, but it slammed into the mahogany desk with a sickening crack. The impact was enough. The small, rhythmic pendulum of the metronome snapped. The silence that followed was immediate and total, a deafening rupture in the booming chorus of the archive. Alex froze, their hand inches from the pulsing book. The entire vault shuddered violently. The black void ink recoiled, sucking itself back into the seams of the steel door. "You fool!" Alex screamed, turning on me, their face twisted in pure rage. "You closed the interval. You locked us out." The violet light from the book and map instantly vanished. The room was plunged back into darkness, but this time, the darkness felt stable, cold, and confined. The archive had closed, leaving us trapped within the sterile vault. Alex rushed at me, not with a weapon, but with the intent to harm. "The chronometer spirit is gone, but the void ink still coats the book. I can still decode the lock before the system resets." I sidestepped their lunge, grabbing the desk lamp's heavy metal base. I swung it, not at Alex, but at the pedestal. Smash! The glass and steel pedestal holding the Chronicle of the Void Watchers shattered. The heavy leather-bound book and the copper map crashed onto the marble floor. Alex let out a sound of pure agony, dropping to their knees to shield the sacred items. "No! The data!" I saw my chance. I snatched up the copper map, the key, and moved toward the vault's steel door. It was the only way out. "It's locked, Elias. We're sealed in." Alex shrieked, scrambling up, clutching the book protectively to their chest. "You are trapped with me, and I will tear the coordinates from your memory. You are the archivist, Alex." "You opened the interval," I countered, running my hand along the cold steel. "You should know how to close it." I looked down at the copper map. The lines for conjunction point gamma and anchor beta were still etched there. The symbols that had activated the first anchor, the where and how. I looked at the heavy steel vault door. I knew it had an internal emergency release mechanism, a small dial hidden behind a panel. But the panel was sealed with a magnetic lock that required power. I had to use the map again. I had to force a localized breach. I placed the copper map flat against the steel door, directly over the spot where the magnetic lock would be. "You'll cause a dimensional tear," Alex warned, their voice a mixture of terror and scientific fascination. "It will burn you alive." "It's worth the risk," I muttered. "I'm not collapsing this anchor, Alex. I'm just editing the lock." I focused my will on the map, channeling the memory of the collapse, the chronometer spirit's scream, and the shattering of the grit. I imagined the bisected circle on the map spinning, severing the connection between the door and the lock. Nothing happened for a moment. Then, where the copper touched the steel, a tiny, brilliant blue-white spark erupted. The spark wasn't electricity, it was a pure geometric reaction. The steel around the map began to glow incandescently, turning to liquid light. The outline of the bisected circle and 3 spirals burned itself into the vault door. The magnetic lock panel exploded inward with a shower of molten metal. The hole was small, jagged, and terrifyingly hot, but it was an opening. "You are not Alistair Finch. Alex raged, charging at me with the heavy book raised like a weapon. "You are not an architect." "No," I replied, dodging the clumsy swing. "I'm an acquirer." I shoved Alex hard against the opposite wall. They hit the marble with a heavy thud, momentarily stunned, dropping the book. I squeezed through the molten hole in the door, singeing my clothes and skin on the edges of the newly created dimensional floor. I emerged into the main library vault corridor. The lights were out here too, but the emergency low-level bulbs were still faintly glowing. I slammed the heavy steel door of the Finch collection vault shut, sealing Alex and the book inside. I didn't try to lock it. Alex was a problem for the authorities. I had a bigger problem. I looked at my hand. The copper map was fused to my palm by the heat and the strange geometric energy, but it was still intact. I carefully peeled it off, dropping it into my jacket pocket. I had escaped with the key, but the book, the Chronicle, was still in Alex's possession. I had lost the final map, the coordinate to the true archive. I ran down the corridor toward the main exit. But as I rounded a corner, I stopped dead. Standing there, waiting for me, was a man. He was tall, wearing a crisp security uniform, but something was wrong. His eyes were wide and glazed over, staring straight ahead. His mouth hung slightly open. He held a large, heavy fire axe, his hands gripping it tightly. And etched into the blade of the axe, pulsing with a faint, internal black light, was the same bisected circle diagram. The security guard's voice was low, gravelly, and multi-toned. The voice of the Clockwork Man. "The interval may be closed, Elias. But the shadow is still here. You carry the map that defines me. And I will have my heart back." The Chronometer spirit hadn't been trapped by the collapsing archive. It had followed me. And now it had a new, much more effective anchor. The sight of the Chronometer spirit inhabiting the security guard, the familiar, multi-toned rasp emanating from the blank, uniformed face, sent a fresh wave of primal terror through me. I realized the true horror of the entity. It wasn't just a clockwork machine, it was a temporal predator that could hijack any host, using its mechanical core to tether itself to our reality. The creature raised the fire axe slowly, the blade pulsing with that sickly black light, turning the common tool into a weapon of geometric collapse. "The map defines the anchor, Elias," the Chronometer spirit hissed, its voice echoing unnervingly in the low-lit corridor. "You used my own geometry against me. Now, I will recalibrate." It lumbered forward, its movements heavy, but unnervingly precise. I didn't have time to run. I was trapped between the enraged Alex Finch behind the sealed vault door and the possessed guard in front of me. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the copper map. The minute I touched it, the metal surged with a cold, electric feeling. The creature saw the map. "Give me the key. I will not allow the archive to be charted beyond my control." "You are not controlling anything," I shouted, desperate to buy time. "You are a broken rhythm, a time trap." I had to use the map again, but this time, not to open or close an anchor, but to disrupt the connection between the Chronometer spirit and its host. I scanned the wall near the security guard. Hanging on a simple hook was an emergency fire blanket, a sheet of thick, densely woven fiberglass. The creature swung the axe. I ducked and rolled sideways as the heavy blade tore a massive, sparking gouge in the marble floor where I had been standing. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the fire blanket off the wall, and hurled it over the chronometer spirit's head. The entity let out a strangled, echoing roar as the dense, foreign material enveloped its head and shoulders, momentarily blinding it. It swung the axe wildly, slicing through the air with terrifying force. I used the brief distraction to run past it, sprinting down the corridor toward the emergency exit sign. "You cannot escape the Wen," the creature bellowed, ripping the blanket off its head. It paused for a second, then its head snapped up, focusing on the exit sign. It didn't run. Instead, it raised the axe again, holding it level with its own chest. "The time is already marked," it whispered, its voice sounding satisfied. And then, with a terrible grunt of physical effort, the chronometer spirit drove the fire axe deep into its own chest. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring in horror. The security guard collapsed instantly, the axe handle sticking out of his uniform. The body lay motionless. But the chronometer spirit wasn't dead. Where the metal blade had pierced the uniform, the wound began to glow with a blinding green light. The light rapidly expanded, consuming the security guard's body. The human flesh and bone dissolved, not into ash, but into a swirling vortex of greenish yellow numbers and symbols that streamed from the wound. The host was gone, but the spirit was free. The symbols solidified instantly, taking the shape of a single, enormous, glowing green pendulum that swung smoothly, silently, in the middle of the corridor, extending from the ceiling to the floor. The chronometer spirit had inverted the security guard, turning him into a living, ticking temporal mechanism. A second later, a loud, distorted boom echoed from the vault I had just escaped. The door had buckled inward, and Alex Finch, wild-eyed, covered in dust, clutching the Chronicle, staggered out. Alex saw the glowing pendulum and stopped, staring in fascination. "The chronometer is unbound," Alex shouted. "It's defining the when of the true archive." The pendulum swung past me, and as it did, the air around it felt impossibly cold. I could see the lines of the corridor waver and warp. I looked at the copper map, which was vibrating violently in my hand. The pendulum's swing was destabilizing the geometry of the entire floor. I had to get past the pendulum. I sprinted toward the glowing mechanism. I timed my jump, leaping high into the air as the massive pendulum swung toward me, clearing the glowing mass by inches. As I landed on the other side, I felt a sharp, burning sensation on my back. A piece of my jacket, and a strip of skin beneath it, had been scrubbed away by the sheer force of the temporal field. But I was free. I burst through the emergency exit doors and stumbled out into the cold, Boston night air. I didn't stop to look back. I ran blindly until the distant sounds of police sirens began to overwhelm the ringing in my ears. I finally collapsed on a park bench, gasping for breath. The copper map was hot in my pocket. The events of the night were a chaotic whirlwind, a collapsing attic, a furious clockwork entity, a manipulative descendant, and a book that was the key to an unimaginable dimensional archive. I pulled out the copper map. It had stopped vibrating. I looked at the Omega Point, the Harrington archive location. Alex was trapped there, either fighting the unbound chronometer spirit or finally deciphering the final coordinate. My eyes followed the lines past the omega point, past the symbols I didn't understand, to the absolute edge of the copper sheet. There, almost invisible, was a series of tiny pinpricks, seemingly random. But now, with the memory of the Void Watcher's resonant boom still fresh in my mind, they resolved themselves into a pattern. It was a stanza. A short sequence of 3 geometric phrases, written in a different code than the rest of the map. It was the final instruction left by Alistair Finch. I pulled the note from AF out of my pocket, the one with the eye seal. I smoothed it out. We will meet again where the map concludes. The map had concluded. And I knew the final destination wasn't a library or a house. It was a single, precise location that Finch had tried to hide from everyone, including his own manuscript. The tiny pinpricks on the copper map, when cross-referenced with my knowledge of 18th century New England astronomy, spelled out the coordinates for a desolate, forgotten place, the old stone bridge crossing the Saco River in New Hampshire. The map didn't just show coordinates. It showed a ritual. I had to get to the Saco River. I had to assume that Alex Finch, if they escaped the chronometer, would realize the coordinates weren't in the book, but on the copper key I carried. I was in a race now. A race against an entity made of time and an archivist seeking cosmic sight. And the final confrontation would be at an ancient, stone bridge, the last, desperate anchor in Finch's terrifying cartography. I commandeered a rental car before dawn and drove north, the copper map resting on the passenger seat, its cool surface a constant, unnerving presence. I had no idea if Alex Finch had escaped the chronometer spirit, but I couldn't risk the chance. The old stone bridge over the Saco River was the final node, the Omega, hidden in plain sight. The drive was agonizing. Every time I glanced at the copper map, the tiny pinpricks on the edge seemed to pulse, urging me faster. The stanza Finch had etched there was the crucial difference between Alex and me. They would be searching for the final page in the book. I was heading for the true final destination on the map. By mid-morning, I reached the Saco River in a remote corner of New Hampshire. The old stone bridge was exactly as forgotten as the coordinates suggested, a massive, single-arch structure built of rough-hewn granite in the late 17th century, now bypassed by modern roads and choked with moss and ivy. The air here was damp, heavy with the scent of pine and cold river water. The river itself flowed sluggishly beneath the arch, dark and deep. I parked the car out of sight and approached the bridge on foot. The ground beneath the granite structure was uneven and muddy. I was immediately drawn to the Keystone, the central, wedge-shaped stone at the highest point of the arch. It was larger and more worn than the surrounding stones, almost perfectly centered over the deepest point of the river. I pulled out the copper map and held it up, aligning the final, faint pinprick cluster, the stanza, with the physical structure. The map confirmed it. The Keystone was the true final anchor. It was here that Alistair Finch had intended to perform his final act, not to hide the archive, but to destroy it. I placed my hand on the cold granite of the Keystone. The stone felt strangely warm beneath the moss. I started scraping away the layer of dirt and lichen, revealing the raw rock beneath. And there it was. Not etched, but deeply carved into the Keystone, was the familiar geometric design, the bisected circle with the 3 perfect spirals. The diagram of the interval. But this one was different. Running through the center of the circle was a long, clean fault line, a crack that ran down the face of the keystone and continued down the side of the bridge structure, disappearing into the dark river below. The crack wasn't a flaw. It was the closing mechanism. I understood the stanza now. It wasn't just coordinates, it was a sequence of forces. Before I could fully decipher the required forces, a sharp, metallic clank echoed from the woods behind me. I spun around. Alex Finch emerged from the trees, looking far worse than I had. Their suit was torn, their face was cut, and the thick, violet reflecting spectacles were gone, revealing eyes that were now red-rimmed and strangely vacant. They were still clutching the Chronicle of the Void Watchers, the large, leather-bound book, to their chest. Elias Thorne, Alex spat, their voice dry and strained. You fled. But the map always guides the searcher. You survived the Chronometer spirit, I noted, my hand immediately gripping a heavy river stone nearby. It's a primitive mechanism, Alex sneered, though their breathing was ragged. It was hunting the Wen. I merely gave it a different target, a nearby grandfather clock factory. It's tied up now, enjoying its own temporal collapse. I knew the final coordinate wouldn't be in the book. Finch was too clever. He put the instructions on the book, and the key on the map. Alex raised the Chronicle in one hand, displaying the front cover. Where the quartz polygon and the copper map had been pressed, a set of deep, glowing symbols, the true final stanza, were now burned into the leather. I have the final lock. You have the final key, Alex said, moving on to the granite bridge structure. We don't have time to fight. The archive is destabilized. It is pulling the data to its core. They pointed at the keystone. This is the core, Elias. The final anchor. When we touch the map to the keystone, the true archive will open here. But we must be ready to enter. Enter? I scoffed. Finch built this to seal the archive, Alex. Look at the fault line. It's meant to shatter the anchor. No. He built it to protect the final knowledge. Alex's voice rose in pitch. The archive contains the true shape of reality. The map of the gaps. Once we open it, we will see everything. We will become a Void Watcher. I looked at the keystone, at the granite crack running down its center. Finch's plan wasn't just cartography, it was applied structural geometry. The whole bridge was a massive, inverted fulcrum, waiting to be shattered at its weakest point. You are wrong, Alex. The stanza is a destruct code, I stated, pulling the copper map out and holding it ready. It's not about entering. It's about erasing the anchor. Alex looked at the map in my hand, then at the book in theirs, an expression of desperate calculation on their face. Then let us see which architect was right, Alex challenged. We will combine the key and the lock simultaneously. If it opens, I win. If it shatters, you. Alex paused, a manic glint in their eye. then we both lose the greatest knowledge ever hidden. Alex raised the Chronicle high, ready to slam it against the Keystone. I gripped the copper map, ready to do the same. We were facing each other across the deep, cracked heart of the final anchor. 3, I whispered, bracing myself. 2, Alex countered, their breath hitching. 1. We both brought our hands down in unison, slamming the copper map and the leather-bound book against the exposed, cracked granite of the Keystone. The contact was not a crash, but a terrifying, silent implosion. The granite keystone did not shatter. Instead, the bisected circle diagram carved on its surface began to spin with blinding speed. The entire ancient stone bridge structure groaned, a deep, resonant sound like a continental shelf tearing apart. The river water beneath the bridge was instantly displaced, sucked violently upward into the arch. And in the space beneath the spinning keystone, where the river water had been, a new portal opened. It was not black or watery like the previous breach. It was a perfect, seamless, crystalline dome of glass, extending down into the earth, reflecting the midday sun with an impossible, blinding light. And inside the crystalline dome, suspended in an atmosphere of pure white light, was the true archive. It wasn't books or shelves. It was a massive, intricate clockwork universe, a three-dimensional, living map of interconnected gears and levers, all moving in perfect, impossible synchronicity. Each gear was a galaxy, each lever a dimension. And the entire, magnificent structure was anchored by a single, dark, humming object at its center. The core, Alex breathed, dropping the Chronicle and taking an ecstatic step forward. It's the mechanism of reality. The ultimate sight. I watched as the dark object at the center of the crystalline dome began to spin faster, pulling the entire structure toward the cracked keystone. I had failed. I hadn't shattered the anchor. I had activated it. Alex didn't wait. They leaped onto the keystone, preparing to dive into the crystalline dome. I win, Elias. I will be the last Void Watcher. I had one final card to play. The stanza wasn't a destruct code for the anchor. It was a destruct code for the key. As Alex prepared to jump, I grabbed the fallen leather book, the Chronicle, and, with a scream of effort, I slammed it against the back of the copper map still affixed to the keystone. I wasn't using the map to open the archive. I was using the book to destroy the map. A terrible, crackling whip sound tore through the air. The copper map instantly turned black, vaporizing into a cloud of metallic dust. The key was gone. The instant the copper map vanished, the spinning diagram on the keystone stopped dead. The crystalline dome of the true archive shimmered violently, then began to implode, pulling the river water back down with it in a massive, chaotic rush. Alex, mid-leap, fell, not into the archive, but onto the cracked granite of the bridge. The true archive was sealing. But Alex had one last move. Alex grabbed the granite keystone and ripped at the stone fault line. If I can't enter, I will drag it back to me. Alex shrieked. The final anchor shattered. The whole bridge groaned and began to break apart. I saw Alex fall, clinging to the keystone as it tilted and slipped into the black, rushing river water. I scrambled back, tumbling away from the collapsing stone, narrowly escaping the bridge's final, drowning embrace. The archive was sealed. Alex and the Chronicle were gone, taken by the river and the collapsing geometry of the Keystone. I stood on the muddy bank, soaked and shaking, watching the final section of the massive granite arch crash into the churning Saco River. The echo was silent. The interval was closed. But I was left with a chilling certainty. The archive wasn't gone. It was merely displaced. And the river, dark and ancient, now held the final coordinates, waiting for the next person desperate enough to search. I stood on the muddy bank, the roar of the collapsing stone bridge still ringing in my ears. The Saco River, usually a serene current, was a churning chaos of black water and granite debris. The final anchor was gone, shattered by the collision of Finch's destructive will and Alex's desperate greed. I was alive, but I was stripped bare. The copper map was vaporized. Alex Finch, the Chronicle of the Void Watchers, and the key to the true archive were now at the bottom of the river, consumed by the same geometric backlash that sealed the omega point. My hunt was over. I had lost. The ultimate, forbidden knowledge was once again lost to the world, and I was left with nothing but fragments of a terrifying truth. I spent the next hour hiding the rental car further in the woods, then walked several miles to the nearest town, an old logging community that seemed indifferent to the massive geological event that had just occurred nearby. The interval was closed. The world had been safely insulated from the truth. I found a small, cheap motel and locked myself in the room. I needed sleep, a shower, and time to process the chaotic trauma of the last 48 hours. But I couldn't rest. The terror had been replaced by annoying, intellectual obsession. I had spent years acquiring lost knowledge, and now I had encountered the source code of all lost knowledge, the archive itself. I realized I wasn't entirely empty-handed. I had a memory that was too precise, too geometric, to ignore. I pulled out a notepad and pen. I began to sketch, trying to recall the exact symbols I had seen, the bisected circle and 3 spirals, the interval diagram, the lines extending from the spirals on the copper map, the wavelengths, the single word etched in the destroyed pocket watch, echo. The final, shattered core of the true archive, the Clockwork universe. As I sketched the Clockwork universe, the image of that massive, crystalline machine of interconnected gears, my hand suddenly shook. I realized something fundamental. The Chronometer spirit, the Clockwork man, wasn't an entity trying to escape the archive. It was a component of the archive. It hadn't wanted the copper map to chart the archive. It had wanted it back because the map was the key to its own existence. The Clockwork man was the mechanism that defined the when of the interval, and my pocket watch had been its heart. When I broke the watch on its chest, I didn't destroy it, I simply forced it to find a new, larger when, the security guard. But the real Chronometer spirit was that massive, central, dark object in the crystalline dome. That was the master clock. The core. And Alex Finch had jumped toward it. If Alex and the Chronicle had been simply dragged into the river, I wouldn't be worried. But the archive had imploded. It had retracted its core. The Clockwork universe would have absorbed Alex, the Chronicle, and the shattering granite Keystone into the past, the non-Euclidean reality of the Void Watchers. Suddenly, the image of Alex's vacant, red-rimmed eyes came back to me. They hadn't looked like the eyes of a mad scientist. They had looked like the eyes of a new host. My blood ran cold. The chronometer spirit was gone, but the true core of the archive, the master of all vents, had just acquired a new, infinitely more intelligent host in Alex Finch. And it had acquired the final, definitive map of the Void Watchers, the Chronicle. I looked at my sketches, tracing the geometric lines. I realized I could recreate the essence of the interval diagram. I had enough of the knowledge to understand the principles of a localized dimensional breach. I sat there for hours, the pen flying across the page, charting the next move. The police would be looking for the person who blew a hole in the Harrington archive vault and caused a minor geological event in New Hampshire. I had to disappear. But before I disappeared, I had to leave a trail, a breadcrumb for the next researcher, the next Elias Thorne. I drove out before midnight, taking an obscure route back toward Blackwood Manor, the original site, the first anchor. I didn't enter the manor again. It was sealed, haunted by the memory of the chronometer spirit. I drove past it, heading further down the coast, until the road ended at a massive, crumbling lighthouse. This lighthouse was known to local folklore as the Sentinel of Lost Time. It had been decommissioned for over a century, its lens shattered, its granite tower crumbling. I climbed the steep, winding stairs in the dark, using a powerful flashlight. The top was open to the cold, salty wind. I walked to the center of the platform. Using a heavy stone, I began to etch the interval diagram, the bisected circle with the 3 spirals, into the stone floor of the lighthouse platform. I carved it deep, ensuring it would survive for decades. This was my final message, my warning. The archive can be opened anywhere. The interval is a frequency, not a place. I looked out over the dark, tumultuous ocean. The water stretched out, endless and silent. A flash of movement caught my eye. Far, far out on the horizon, where the dark water met the black sky, a single, impossibly bright violet light flared, then vanished. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't lightning. It was the exact violet light I had seen reflected in Alex Finch's spectacles just before the Omega Point opened. The true archive had been successfully opened and closed. And its new host, Alex Finch, was out there, traveling. They were using the Chronicle to plot the full cartography of the gaps. I dropped the stone, my hands shaking. I had failed to seal the knowledge. I had merely delivered the ultimate tool into the hands of a superior intellect, one now controlled by the core of the Void Watchers. I had to survive. I had to disappear. And I had to prepare for the inevitable. The chase wasn't over. It had just gone global, spanning not just countries, but dimensions. I descended the lighthouse stairs, taking one last look at the carved diagram on the platform. It was my legacy, my confession, and my final call to action. The age of the Void Watchers had begun. I was merely the first person to witness its terrifying dawn. Skull the Echoing Archive, Part 12. The next cartographer. The next morning, I was gone. Elias Thorne, the archivist of the Forbidden, had vanished. I live now under a new name, in a small, isolated town, working a mundane job. I blend in, watching the news, but paying attention not to the headlines, but to the anomalies, sudden, localized magnetic field shifts, reports of architecture that seems to defy physics, unexplained temporal loops reported by remote research stations. The violet light is traveling. I spend my nights in front of a digital map of the world. I don't use conventional coordinates. I use Finch's geometry. I have recreated the wavelengths from the vaporized copper map using memory and mathematical extrapolation. I chart points where the interval diagram could be successfully activated, where the fabric of reality is thin enough to serve as a temporary anchor. I know Alex Finch, or whatever the core has made of them, is not hunting me for revenge. They are hunting for tools and new anchors. They are charting the full, three-dimensional landscape of the Void Watcher's reality, using the Chronicle as a master legend. And I know the one thing they will need to plot their final, master map: grit. The physical material of the interval, the white sand from the hourglasses that can set the duration of the echo. My research has led me to a single, final destination. A remote scientific facility in the high Arctic, established decades ago to study deep-core ice formations. It's a facility I know contains one of the world's largest, most protected caches of high-purity silicate crystal, the core component of the white sand used in Finch's hourglasses. I am moving again. I may have lost the book and the key, but I possess the intent. I know Finch's final goal was to seal the knowledge forever, to protect humanity from the geometric terror of the Void Watchers. Alex Finch is a brilliant, powerful archivist, now amplified by a cosmic clockwork entity. Their goal is to open the permanent, final archive, to break the seal on our reality. My goal is to destroy the final supply of grit, the last component needed to establish that permanent duration. I am no longer an acquirer of knowledge. I am the architect's correction. I pack my bag. I have no map, only the cold, hard geometry burned into my mind. I am trading my life for one last chance at saving a reality that doesn't even know it's under attack. The flight to the Arctic leaves at midnight. I know I will find Alex Finch there. I know the core will be waiting. And I know that this final confrontation will not be about books or keys, but about which intent, destruction or preservation, will define the future of the echoing archive. The Arctic base, a cluster of prefabricated domes hunkered down against the relentless wind and ice, was starkly illuminated by the setting sun, a long, cold twilight that stretched for hours. I moved under the cover of a massive blizzard, the wind muffling the crunch of my boots on the permafrost. I had successfully infiltrated the facility, slipping past automated defenses. The primary objective was the sublevel storage vault containing the high-purity silicate crystal, the raw grit needed to set the duration of the permanent archive. I reached the vault door, a formidable steel bulkhead. Etched faintly into the ice covering the ground outside the door were recent, unnervingly precise lines, the bisected circle diagram. Alex had been here. I heard a low, synthesized hum from inside the vault. The chronometer spirit score was active. I didn't bother with the lock. I placed a premixed, highly volatile thermite charge against the steel. This wasn't a precision incision, this was a forceful disruption. The thermite ignited with a blinding flash and a deafening roar that was immediately swallowed by the blizzard. The steel vaporized, and I plunged into the vault through the molten hole, dodging the collapsing frame. The vault was vast, cold, and packed with machinery. In the center, Under a single bright utility light stood Alex Finch. They were no longer torn or panicked. Alex stood perfectly still, their movements preternaturally smooth. They wore a heavy thermal suit, but their expression was utterly blank. Their eyes, the violet glow now faded, staring straight ahead with a terrifying, calm intensity. The master copy of the Chronicle of the Void Watchers rested on a metal workbench nearby. And in front of them, scattered across the floor in a precise, geometric pattern, were dozens of small, polished quartz prisms. Elias Thorne, Alex's voice was now perfectly flat, completely devoid of inflection, a pure echo of the chronometer's core. You are expected. Your final movement was plotted. The wavelengths are triangulated. Alex didn't move towards me. Their focus was entirely on the quartz prisms and the single, massive, steel container in the corner labeled high-purity silicate, the grit. The core has integrated the knowledge of the Chronicle, Alex stated, speaking for the entity within. The interval is ready to be made permanent. The quartz prisms are the final anchor points. The grit provides the infinite duration. I raised the one item I had, a briefcase containing a series of high-powered, localized EMP emitters. I'm not here to fight you, Alex. I'm here to deny the core its fuel. You will fail. The intent of preservation is a flawed data set, Alex countered. The core needs the grit to set the final when. Without it, we are relegated to mere echoes. I took a step towards the silicate container, my hand reaching for the EMP trigger. Alex finally moved, their speed startling. They swept the leather-bound Chronicle off the bench. You seek to destroy the grit. I will destroy the map. Alex placed the open Chronicle down on the floor, directly in the center of the quartz prism pattern, and then raised the heavy sole of their boot, ready to stomp down on the antique leather. The book is the final lock, Elias. Destroy it, and the core loses the coordinates of the Void Watcher's reality forever. Which is the greater risk? I was frozen. If I destroyed the grit, Alex might still have enough time to use the remaining quartz to set a temporary, lethal anchor and escape. If I saved the grit and let Alex destroy the book, the knowledge would be lost forever, but the immediate threat of a permanent dimensional opening would remain. I chose the only path that honored Finch's ultimate goal, destruction of the anchor. The map is in your head, Alex. But the duration is physical. I screamed, lunging away from the book, running toward the container of silicate. I slammed the EMP trigger. The vault filled with a silent, invisible wave of electromagnetic energy. Every piece of electronic equipment immediately died. The utility light snapped off, plunging the vault into darkness, save for the weak, red emergency lights. The synthesized hum of the core stopped. But the core, the temporal entity, was prepared. The moment the power failed, the dozens of quartz prisms on the floor began to glow with intense, internal green light. The stored temporal energy was being released. Alex Finch, the host, didn't flinch. Their body began to blur, the edges of their outline flickering, showing that the core was activating the ultimate duration using the stored energy. The core is now the chronometer of infinity, Alex's voice resonated, no longer a spoken word, but a sound from the glowing geometry itself. We do not need the physical grit. We are the when. The glow intensified, turning the quartz prisms into blinding beacons. The air shrieked as the massive steel container of silicate began to liquefy and be drawn, not by heat, but by geometric force, toward the glowing prisms. The core was going to extract the grit by hand, turning the quartz into a final, catastrophic anchor. I had one final chance. The correction. I remembered the stanza, Finch's code to vaporize the copper map by crashing the book into it. I needed to destroy the source code itself. I scrambled back to the workbench, grabbing a discarded, heavy lithium-ion battery pack, the only remaining source of chemical energy. I didn't have time to use the stanza. I had to create a powerful, chaotic energy field to shatter the geometry. I sprinted toward Alex, holding the battery pack and the EMP device. The massive core, using Alex's body, began to swell, the thermal suit stretching and tearing as geometric shapes pressed against the fabric from inside. I leaped into the blinding light, driving the EMP device into Alex's chest, right where the Clockwork man's core had been. With my other hand, I slammed the lithium-ion battery pack against the pulsing, glowing quartz prisms. The reaction was immediate and absolute. The combination of the chemical energy explosion from the battery and the pure magnetic counterpulse from the EMP hitting the established temporal geometry of the quartz was catastrophic. The vault did not explode outward. It imploded. I felt a terrifying, singular jolt, followed by absolute darkness and silence. All sound, all light, all pressure, gone. I awoke sometime later, lying on the cold, sterile floor. The vault was a wreck, covered in dust and debris. The steel silicate container was twisted and ripped apart. The grit scattered. I pushed myself up. My clothes were scorched, my body bruised, but I was alive. I looked where Alex had been. There was nothing left. No body, no quartz, no core. Only a faint, circular scorch mark on the floor, and a lingering smell of ozone and burnt leather. Alex Finch, the host, and the core of the chronometer spirit had been consumed by the ultimate, chaotic correction. They had been entirely excised from the timeline. I walked over to the metal workbench. Miraculously, the Chronicle of the Void Watchers was still there. Its leather binding was singed, but intact. It had survived the destruction of the key and the final correction. I picked up the heavy book. The geometry was still dangerous, but the immediate threat was gone. I had failed to preserve the knowledge. I had failed to seal the archive. But I had succeeded in preventing the permanent anchor. I left the Arctic facility as quietly as I came. I am now in possession of the most dangerous manuscript in history. I can't read it, the final pages remain cryptic, waiting for the next anchor to be set. I am the last person to know the map. I am the last archivist. My hunt is over. My responsibility has just begun. I carry the Chronicle, the book that defines reality and the Void Watchers, wherever I go. I am its guardian, its protector, ensuring that the flawed, terrifying knowledge it contains remains lost until the day I find a true, final way to destroy it entirely. The violet light is no longer seen on the horizon. But I look at the dark leather book in my hands every day, and I know, The echo is always listening. And the watchers are patient.